of colleagues who are doing this work as well. And I'll talk a little bit about the program that I'm connected to, Natural Dreamwork, and so on. So just to say quickly, so folks know, we are recording, and I think we're recording that if there's folks who aren't able to be here today who've registered, they'll be able to watch it later. So I always like to say that if we're recording, especially when we're talking about dreams, because dreams naturally have a way of introducing some pretty intense material at times, and can be very intimate and revealing. So an introduction to myself. Yes, my name is Laura Smith-Riva. I am an archetypal dreamwork practitioner, a natural dreamwork practitioner, and I'll explain that transition for me a little bit. To give you my background, I am not a trained mental health professional. I am a person who came to this work by virtue of my own journey and struggle with my own trauma and my healing. And so I came to the dreams because I was having very intense dreams, and found a group of folks who called themselves archetypal dreamwork practitioners through an organization called North of Eden, which is based in Vermont, where I live. And I worked with them and studied in their school, which at that time was called the Center for Archetypal Dreamwork, which was a school that was underneath a larger umbrella organization called North of Eden. That organization does still exist, although in a smaller form. The original founding teachers, Mark Bregman and Crystal Lancaster, are still teaching. At that time, that was a 4-year program, which I participated in. I've been working with dreams my whole life, really. Even if I go back to dream journals from my childhood, I used to write, they weren't dream journals, they were just journals, but there were dreams interspersed in there. It's been very interesting to look at those. Since then, I've been studying dreams in an intentional way and working with others for about 10 years. And my interaction with this group, Natural Dreamwork, one of the students of North of Eden, who was a student during the time that I was a student, his name is Roger Kamenetz. He's a poet and an author and a dreamwork practitioner, and he founded an offshoot school called Natural Dreamwork. And I rebranded a couple of years ago from archetypal dreamwork to natural dreamwork, but essentially we're talking about the same thing in that we are accessing material which comes through the psyche, through our dreams, which carries with it the energy of what we might think of as archetypes, although I do use that word differently maybe than what Jungian analysts may be familiar with from that Jungian sense. And I think I've been trying to move a little bit away from it because I think it does sometimes cause confusion, but we could talk more about that. That's probably enough of an introduction. I do live in Vermont. I live in the United States. I live in Vermont, which is a small state, for those who don't know, in the northeastern section of the United States. It's cold here in the winter and and hot in the summer. And we're just moving into our winter now. And I'm happy to be here. So thank you for giving me a chance to just do a brief introduction.
Thank you, Laura. I want to say I was really moved by what you said, that you came to this work through your own process and your own healing of trauma. And I think at SMART, we really, that's the way most of us have come into this work. And I think there's something very poignant and deep when the facilitator or the trainer has really worked through it at a very, very personal level before they offer it professionally, you know. So I was really moved by that, and that's why maybe I'm so drawn to your work, because I think it resonates, and I think working with you, I can see it feels safe, and it feels like that I can feel your experience through it, and I think that's really beautiful. So
thank you.
Thank you for that. I was wondering, Laura, if you could tell us a little bit, because we at SMART, we see the container of our work is depth psychology, and a lot of the expressive arts we see as active imagination. So we do, do Jungian theory, and in the expressive body, there will be a whole module on Jungian theory. So we have a sense of what the dream work means in Jungian analysis. And I'm just curious to know if you have, how you see archetypal dream work. You see it very similar, very different? And if you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I'll speak a little bit to it. I'm not trained in Jungian analysis, although I will say I've been very drawn to depth psychology and have done a bit of studying and reading, and see certainly a lot of parallel to depth work. And I do think of dream work as depth work. I think one difference is, like, I think the Jungians they use the words animus and anima, and they view the archetypes in a very specific way. And I think that perhaps in the work that I do and the way it's kind of grown is we use the words a little bit differently, maybe. And I think I've tried to move away from them a little bit, just so that it isn't confusing. Mm-hmm. And so you and others who are here, maybe who've done work with me, would recognize perhaps I might use the divine masculine rather than the animus, because the Jungians view that the anima as sort of the genderized part of the man, and the animus as this sort of part of the woman. And we view those energies as inherent for both sexes, and work needing to be done perhaps in both of those areas. So I will often refer to, the masculine or the feminine, because the energies come in that way. I mean, they come in a dualistic way in the dreams. And so by nature, and we are dualistic beings, so by nature, we end up having this sort of conversation in this dualistic concept. But that concept of dualism is actually not the truth. And the dreams are, of course, bringing us towards wholeness. They're wanting to bring those two parts together to facilitate, growth and healing. What was the rest of your question?
No, I think you've answered that, and I think this is another. I mean, I was planning to ask this much later, but since you've already gone there, is we say that in expressive arts, we say that the artwork holds both the potential and the wounding, or it holds both the wounding and the potential in one piece of art. And often that's how I experience dream work as well. It will show us the wound where it is, but it also shows us the potential. But I think what you spoke about just now, and was also going maybe a little bit deeper to that point of non-duality. They go beyond polarities, right? You go. Did I understand that right? Because
yeah, I think so, and I think that we will see that. I mean, I think for folks doing this work, oftentimes what I see folks coming into this work initially, particularly where there's trauma, what the dreams are attempting to do is open us to the vulnerability of working with that material. And they will show us in a reflective way how we dissociate, how we cope, how we, what our complexes are and our conditioning is, that has allowed us basically to survive and progress in our lives in whatever way that we have. So it will show our fight, flight, freeze responses, and all of those things sort of show how we are deadened in a way, or parts of us are deadened. And I have this wonderful poem that Roger Kamenetz, who is has been one of my teachers, and I'll just share it briefly. And I have an image too, which kind of encapsulates a painting that I did actually quite a while ago, early on in my work, that sort of encapsulates what you're talking about in a very visual way, this idea of the trauma promise held in that same moment. I don't remember who it was who said that the way through is through the wound. But Roger has this poem that I thought was so interesting when I was thinking about this presentation, and the expressive arts, which I so support because it's been a huge part of my own work, not in a formal way, but just working in a creative way with the material. So this dream is called Where the Man Sat, and I think it kind of encapsulates that deadened part of ourselves when we kind of begin to recognize we've got some work to do, and the dreams are going to help us with that. This is from a book called Yonder, which is a book of poetry by Roger, and they're all dream inspired. I believe this one's one of his dream inspired poetry books. So Where the Man Sat. We found a waiting room for people who cannot feel. On the walls were captions with pictures cut away. When the teacher entered wearing an apron of severed heads, several cried out for the first time. But it was soon determined actual emotion had not registered. This was merely a surprise. The bulbs under the molding failed to blink. A gray man said, I used to have feelings, but kept them underneath. Where is underneath, said the interrogator. Rain fell all through the waiting room, soaking the mothballs that simulate indifference. Another gray man was caught eagerly sympathizing with his counterpart in a mirror. Underneath, the first gray man said after a pause, where I am sitting on something enormous. But no one wanted to look exactly there. And what I love about the poem, in fact, even just reading it out loud brings up some feeling, and I think maybe grief for me, because it's so true. We haven't wanted to look because it is painful to look. Mm-hmm. And one thing that the dreams are going to do, and if you want to do dream work, you have to be prepared for this, is they're not going to let the sleeping dogs lie. They're going to want to, you need to look, you have to go there. I'll show you the image. And I have to do a couple of clicks. So just bear with me while I go through that process of getting the image to the screen. And I will say, I'll show the image. It's a quite intense image. So I just give a little trigger warning for folks who, because it does speak to trauma for myself. And I'll talk a little bit about the dream and what came to me in the dream. And prior to this dream, there were many dreams ahead of this dream that required a lot of pretty deep work for me. So I'm going to just kind of go and find the photo and share it. This one. So this image, which is a very intense image, so I will say in the dream, this is a representation of the feeling of the wound. And what happened for me in the dream was that this woman, who I would characterize as the divine feminine, was putting this healing salve on my wounds. And I was experiencing the touch, the gentle touch and the care of this character who came to me in the dream. And so all of the work that I had done up to this point of working through the intensity of trauma was really held for me in this place of receiving the healing and the care in a very direct way. And I did this painting, and of course it's one, I have to say this, I've never really shared this. It is available publicly on my Flickr account, but I've never actually shared it publicly like this before, because I always felt like it was too much, which is part of my own story. I'm too much. But I'm also noticing the mandorla appearance of the wound in the center of the back that I hadn't noticed before, which, if you know something about the mandorla, which is the that shape, the yoni shape, that also carries like this energy of healing, the healing coming through the wound, particularly around the feminine. And I don't know that I realized I was painting that when I painted this, and I'm seeing it just now, actually.
Wow, that's really incredible, Laura, because that's the first thing I noticed. I was like, wow, it really looks like the yoni and the wound of the yoni. And I know in our work, in one of my dreams, there was a yoni-shaped wound in my armpit.
Yeah.
Heart meridian. And I looked at this and I
hidden, right? Like,
yeah.
So, right. So this is like, even just sharing this is like, and I do have sexual trauma. So this is like, it's part of what we do when we open ourselves to this level of vulnerability. And we do this in relationship with a dream work practitioner. there is an intimacy involved. There is a big piece of the work happens through the relationship. So there's a lot of witnessing that the practitioner does, and there's a lot of revealing that is happening as well. So like you're sharing a little piece of your dream, Brinda, dreams are super revealing.
Mm-hmm.
But I did work with my dreams, and I did work in a creative way, and I have hundreds of paintings that I did, and they are available on Flickr. I have a Flickr account, and you can kind of scroll through them if you ever want to see them. But that when you mentioned how, sort of the wound and the possibility
Mm-hmm.
coming together, that image for me is like, there's the wounding, yes, and then there is the possibility for healing.
Mm-hmm.
In Dreamwork, we like to, for me, the healing comes through the feeling. So this is another difference perhaps between Jungian analysis and natural dream work, would be this idea that we're not experiencing the dream through its symbols necessarily, although the symbols are important and they do carry a certain resonance and they have a certain meaning in the collective consciousness and maybe culturally and personally and so on. But it's really about the moment of feeling her hand on my back, putting the healing salve on the wound. So we want to enter the dream through that place, not through the mandorla, the idea of the mandorla. That's an idea, but what is healing is the feeling that is carried through that moment in the dream. And we can return to it over and over again. And those who work with me know that I encourage clients to return to particular moments. Sometimes they're hard moments, and sometimes they're powerfully healing moments or moments of great joy and love, to remember who we are and through the felt experience. I think that's a critical piece of what I do with dream work.
Yeah. Laura, I just want to ask you, when you talk about that we enter the dream with feeling, I totally get that. What happens when a client doesn't remember the feeling? Because sometimes, often they will recall the dream. And I know, we can close your eyes and go back into the dream. And could the feeling be different when they dreamt it and different when they're sitting in front of you?
Yes, that's a great question, because especially folks first coming into this work, many of us are coming in having repressed our feelings for a long time. And so it is extremely difficult to get to the feelings. And for those of you who may be looking to become practitioners, either in expressive art movement or in other healing modalities, to know that it may take many sessions for somebody to really access deeper feelings. Because there's, this idea of emotions, reactions, we might say, which often are reactions to trauma, which are not feeling in the sense that we're going for.
Right.
And so, yes, to answer your question, it can be very hard to get to the feelings. And so a lot of the work in the session might be what I refer to as horizontal, which is really getting at what the situations are in a person's life, like what their background is, what their history is. And that learning, sharing process is building that container of trust, which will allow somebody to drop into a deeper feeling in the vulnerability of a session. Also, the idea of the symbols, like sometimes a discussion of that, just the discussion of it can help drop somebody into a feeling. So folks can be so, we can all be so like mindy or caught into our minds and our ideas about it and our stories, very hard to get to, well, what is my intuition or what is my feeling? Yeah. And so sometimes it can help to approach the dream through the symbolism to get to it. But that's not the goal, is to interpret the dream through the symbols. The goal is to enliven the dream through the feeling. And the last part of your question, can the feeling change? Yes, absolutely, because feelings are mutable, and that's the whole point, is we're working towards movement. Yeah. So we're always working towards movement. Reactions, trauma, which creates reactions, are stuck feelings. There's no movement. And so movement's not a bad thing. If you feel one thing in the dream, and then when you're in the session, all of a sudden, if it was anger in the dream, let's say, and all of a sudden you're in the session and you're talking about it, and suddenly you're in this deep well of grief. Well, now you've just gotten underneath the anger. The feeling is moved. Something's happened. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask a kind of technical question before we go further, is because you made a distinction between emotion and feeling. Could you just maybe elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah.
What do you consider emotion? Yeah.
Words are, we're always trying to kind of explain things, and we have words to do that. I mean, I've got some artwork I want to share and some poetry, because I think sometimes that can convey the message better than I can with words. But I think we try to draw this distinction in natural dream work because oftentimes people have many stories about who they are. If we look at the dream through the point of view of the dreamer, it's one story. If we look at the dream from the point of view of the archetypes, the archetypal realm, if you will, it's a different view of who that person is, because I believe that the archetypes always see us through the eyes of love. And that's the ultimate expression of who we are. And so, but we don't often see ourselves. In fact, many of us have very critical voices that are telling a pretty dark story to us all the time, like really bludgeoning us with that story. So I think the distinction of feeling versus emoting, or not emoting, but
emotion.
I don't know, reaction is probably a better word. Like we might say an emotion is a mutated feeling. And we'll just use the grief anger example. Sometimes anger can be a good feeling, a process feeling, one that we need to move forward. But for many of us, it's a stuck feeling, and it's one that is sitting on top of. Shame is another one. Covering emotion, sitting on top of a deeper well of feeling that's underneath. And so I guess one way to distinguish might be, in a technical way, to say, is the moment of the dream where there's a feeling, is that feeling a reaction to something happening in the dream, or have we just dropped vertically and hit this sort of deep well, some deeper feeling, a level of gravity that I think anybody who's done this work will recognize and can begin to discern the difference between those two places.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if that.
No, it does help. It does help. I think when you say an emotion is a reaction to something that happened in the dream, and the feeling is something that we drop into within ourselves as we kind of look at the dream. I think that helps. Thank you. I'm just going to go to our next question. So I know you started talking about it already, but typically, how does trauma show up in dream work? I know in my own experience that there were a few things that were interesting. One was when I get confused, that was kind of an indication that trauma is close by, and I've switched into thinking. And I think, I just wondered if you had any kind of, I know each person is completely different. Each dream is very different. But just like, what are things that we could, because I also found that confusion was very useful when we work with expressive arts as well. We're really working with the arts, and suddenly the client is confused about, I'm not sure I want to do this, I want to do this. And it really helps them know that, okay, that jerking upwards is possibly a sign that it's not safe anymore, so I just wondered, like that, if you had other kind of
Sure. I do, trauma is such a big topic, but it's an unavoidable one in dream work, because it's a huge part of the healing journey is recovering the parts of ourselves that we've severed as a result of our traumas. And those traumas could be single one big time events. But more often they're incremental. They're incremental in some way, like a pattern of just a pattern that has played out over and over again. And sometimes they can be the result of cultural, family of origin stuff, cultural stuff. They can be sort of these bigger things that are pressing down. Some of it could be generational, that's handed down to us from through our matrilineal or patrilineal lines. But it shows up in the dreams. The dreams themselves could actually bring the traumatic moment back to life. Mm-hmm. So a literal dream that recreates the trauma. Mm-hmm. It also could show up as, it more often shows up as how we are frozen. It shows up in the fight, flight, freeze response. Mm-hmm. We'll see that in the dreams. I think confusion can be, not always, but it can be a hallmark that we are, like you said, we've hit a place where the person doesn't feel safe, and rather than going towards the wound, you jump away, and you can jump away into many things. It could mm-hmm. be anger, it could be a projection at the therapist, mm-hmm. even. It could be confusion, it could be a dissociation. The person just kind of floats away, or they'll just kind of like throw the football that way, like mm-hmm. like a distraction, a red herring, like suddenly mm-hmm. you find yourself over here talking about something and you realize we just jumped away from this really big moment. But the trauma itself, it's very tricky. I have a dream. In fact, I'll share this. This client, any work that I share in here, I have gotten permission from my clients to share the specific material that I will talk about. Of course, there's anonymity because we're not talking about who these people are. It's about the dreams. And I had a session, and these are the couple that I did bring for today. They're all from sessions from this week, actually. Okay. So this particular client is somebody that I've worked with off and on for the last several years. She's also a practitioner of this work, so she's also a colleague. And her particular history has been one where I think the thing that has blocked her the most is how she has this part. It's a caretaking sort of pathology, I guess you could call it, a way of taking care of others to the point where she's sacrificing herself. Mm-hmm. And it manifests in also in an idea that, like, if other people are happy, she's happy. If other people are not happy, then she's not happy. It's almost like she can take on the feelings of others. And in terms of trauma, it's incremental over time. But the dream, and so the reason why I wanted to bring this dream is because it can be very easy. The practitioner could very easily think, oh, trauma, when really it's something else. And so distinguishing between what is related to trauma and what is related to something else is really important. And lots of times folks will have a story about the dream, and we can talk about how dreams open up in the predicate, what I think of as the predicate of the dream, which is how does the dream open? And often the dream will be like, I was walking in the woods, or I was with some people, or I found myself, I was on a ship. There'll be some opening of the dream that kind of establishes where we are. And often a lot of questions are required to get the picture, to really understand what's happening. In this case, her dream starts, I dreamt I am bent over in the middle of a public square. Somehow I come to and I realize I've been raped. And also many, many women in this same spot and position have been raped here too. I've been part of a long chain of women who were disrespected. So this is the opening of the dream, is the idea of a rape. So as a practitioner, the first question you have to ask is, were you ever raped? And no is the answer in this case. No, that never happened. Did you ever experience, no? Did you ever have a no that was not respected in this way? So you kind of like try to distill, is this about a real trauma, or are we now in the realm of what it feels like about a particular issue, whatever it is? And she did have this this piece in here. She said, my father is there too, so I have to ask the question. And this is difficult work, and we have a lot of trust in our relationship. I have to ask the question, did anything ever happen with your father? Was there a violation? No. So we're in the feeling of being violated and feeling how like I'm here and how many other people have been here before. So, but the story and how it opens, I'm bent over and I come to and I realize I've been raped implies, well, first of all, there's a way that the person is unconscious when the so-called violation happens. And then there's the coming to moment. So how does this play out in your life? Like you realize at some point, this is, I've been violated and it's happened in the past. And that violation for her has to do with how she gives herself away in relationships. And then she feels like, how did I get here again? Because what happens is when it's happening, she's not conscious of it. And it's only later that she becomes conscious of it. So it's a pretty intense way to bring it. But the truth is, this is what it feels like to the soul, is to be like, you're there and you've just been screwed again, basically. And for her, there was also another character in the dream who is a woman that she knows who has experienced this kind of violation. So another piece of this moment for her was the story. And the story was, oh, I've experienced this. Now I'm going to be like my friend and I'm going to have to do all this work. And it's just like, I don't want to be in the same category as her, a damaged, severely traumatized person. So she really was feeling revulsion towards the idea of even being traumatized and having to do that work. So that was another piece in it that was a piece of this. So I don't know, I guess one of the things I want to point out is that we do have to really understand that a lot of the material that we're going to be dealing with is often not the direct trauma itself, but the reactions to it. And really understanding the difference is important, and not buying the story. The story is I was raped in the dream. Not to, and I guess I need to also say, this is not about not believing people who have been victimized, because especially for women, and as is indicated in her dream, we all come from a long chain, to use her word, of women who have found themselves in this position of having been violated, whether literally or in other ways that we can feel about our place in our culture, in our families, in our work life, in our family life, where we feel this way that she feels in the dream. And so the work becomes about recovering our own agency. Really, it becomes about recovering our agency. So there's a lot more. I've got other dreams, or I could talk about my own experience. Of trauma and what that has been like to work with. It's quite intense. And there are places where a lot of the work is really about witnessing and allowing the person to get the story out of what did happen. Sometimes they might be sharing it for the first time, and you're the one witnessing that. So you mentioned at the start of our talk, like about, having done my own work. And I do believe that when you've done your own work and been and really dealt with some of that stuff, it does allow you to sit and feel and be okay sitting with others as they do their work. And do so with empathy and understanding and a recognition of how incredibly vulnerable it is.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, Laura. That was really moving. That dream really moved me. Especially the idea of a long chain of women, one after the other. My own experience, and a little bit what you spoke about earlier, was that it is progressive. So the first time it comes in a dream, it's a little bit gentle, and then so you're also, if I look at my, over the years of work, I feel like it prepared me, to slowly hold it, and then when I was ready to touch into it. So for me, I feel like working with dreams, especially when we're doing expressive art therapy, it feels like a great guide to know what the psyche is ready for, as
Yeah,
opposed to the therapist trying to figure out, is the client ready for this? But you just, I feel like it suggests itself in the dream, would I be right in saying that? Or
absolutely. And that's one of the things I love to say about doing dream work. Not to say it's better than any kind of other therapeutic work, because I'll tell you, if I encounter somebody who is presenting issues that I believe are beyond my capacity to help with, or I think maybe requires other help, I do recommend folks seek outside help outside of the dreams. But one of the things that the dreams do is we don't have to figure out what to talk about, because the dreams are bringing it. I mean, the dreams are setting the pace, they're setting the tone, they're suggesting to the dreamer where they need to be looking and what they need to be working on. If the dreamer is open, then that work is going to happen. Now, sometimes they're not ready, even though the dream comes, and folks can say, I don't want to, I'm not ready for this. Okay, well, then that's okay too. But in some way, their psyche already knows what they're ready for. And so usually either the person will leave the work, or they will likely move towards what they know they need to do in some way. So yeah, I love having the dreams, and especially if I get way off track, into somebody's personal problems in their life, I feel myself there, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, let's go back to the dream, because I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not going to help you fix your life problems here. I think an outcome of dream work is there are certain therapeutic outcomes. I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily like, oh, that's the goal, because we don't know what the dreams want from us. But we're working with that material, and I have seen those kinds of outcomes where people have had huge openings and awakenings for themselves that have been really helpful. They've rediscovered some part of themselves that they thought they had lost, and this is where the creative piece can often come in. I'll share, if I might, some work from a client of mine she is an author, and her work as an author, she approaches her creative process as an author in this very sort of technical, it's filled with angst and very technical, like all the things you need to do to craft the story. It's like craftsmanship, very intensely mindy almost, but she's a brilliant writer. I mean, she's a published author, and she had a dream about painting, painting. And I suggested to her, well, have you ever thought about that? And she said, well, actually, I have done some painting in the past, but I've always been a writer. And I said, well, what would it be like to maybe to paint? And she said, well, I have a painting that I did one time, and somebody told me that my painting, that I looked like a really angry person for my painting. And I said, well, so we kind of talked about this, but she decided to work with painting, which is a much more immediate form of expression than her writing was. And I will say that the mind and that craftsmanship wants to come over in the expression of the artwork. And I will also say that she's discovered this whole other part of herself that she didn't know existed, and is loving it. And it is the result of having, really had direct information from the dream that said, hey, this. And so I'll share with you a couple of her pieces of work that she sent to me last night, that she said are influenced by her dreams. And one of them is a dream of where a woman leaves an actual painting leaning against the wall in her house and says, this is for you, or something like that. But I'll show you. So I'm going to go back out here, and I'm going to pick 3 of her pieces to show. Whoops, I think I only did 2. Well, here's one. So she's doing sort of collage work. But so she had this, and let me see if I can find her. the piece she sent me that she wrote about this. So she said, a slender woman actually came into my bedroom and put this painting against the fireplace. In the morning, I realized there was a painting against the fireplace I had done years ago, but never liked. So here's her. She's got a very harsh, critical voice that's always, her work is no good. That's the other thing, you know, she's kind of up against. I painted and collaged the silver gray painting in a few hours. Then I did a second painting about the trip home. Though my profession has been a writer for decades, in my dreams, I am drawn to painting and characters appear showing what to paint and sometimes how to finish it. So this is the painting. This was her recollection of the painting that was leaning against the fireplace in the dream. And so she took an old painting and recrafted it into this image. And the painting, the dream was, it's called, there was one dream. Let me just share one other, because I missed one here that she had that's called Serena's Dream. This one, I'll do these two because these two are really the ones. So that one I showed you, and then this one's called Serena's Dream.
Oh, beautiful.
And so the house, of course, you know, often can be like, if we pull up into the symbolism again, can be about us, like the structure of us. And so she's got all these sort of images, and a lot of her work and what came to her in her early work had to do with her ancestral lineage and her, and a lot of pain through her relationship with her mother and father. And so reclaiming like your archetypal family is a piece of this work, that we can have a new relationship to what it means to have mother, father. Yeah. Oh, and this dream here, she said in the dream, it came, the images were like, on the painting were like calendars. They were like days on a calendar, which marked the days of seclusion relating to COVID and the time that we're in right now with COVID, but also a deeper layer. So here's an opportunity to talk about the layering in the work. We can have this sort of layer that's about the outer world, what's going on in the outer world. And then there's always a personal layer underneath. So I do believe that dreams are for the individual, not for the collective, but they may carry information that's relevant for the collective. And oftentimes dreamers will want to bring you the dream as if it's a dream for others and not for themselves. And so I'm always wanting to understand, what is the dream for you? Right. So for her, it's like how she's secluded her. It's about her fractured self and how she's secluded parts of herself. And her work has been bringing them back together. And I had that other dream up, which, but that other painting, she's got some amazing work. She's had a couple of shows since she started doing this. And it's been a lot of fun to work with my clients when they do get interested in working with the material in a creative way, for sure.
Yeah. Laura, I want to ask you a question, because before we move away from trauma, one question that came from the audience is, sometimes accessing the traumatic memory may not be helpful for the client and is said to be re-traumatizing. How do we deal with this in dream work if the dreams are repressed memories? Does dream work involve processing and accessing traumatic memories directly?
Sometimes I have had that experience before, and I do think that that's a valid point, that it can be re-traumatizing. One thing that I've had to get comfortable with around this idea is one, as I said, if the material is so difficult for the person to be integrating, but it's coming in the dream, then I might recommend that they seek some additional support. Whatever that support is, sometimes it could be somatic support, because it's physical, so physical to them. But I also feel like I have to trust a little bit the dream and the dreamer, you know, and not overreact. So I think I think it's, there's no way to know until you are dealing with it, what direction to go in. I have had that material come, and there have been times where the client has said, I can't go there. It's too challenging. And it's like, okay, we don't need to go there now. Or, it can be, well, what's it like to know? The question might be, what's it like to know that that's there? Not to take them there, but
Right.
what's it like to know that it's there? So you're just, you're letting them, I mean, they already know it's coming.
Yeah.
It's their dream, So yes, very challenging. And before we move off the topic, I have a couple more paintings I want to share with you. And this is from my own personal work. And the way the first dream came to me was I was driving up a steep slope in the forest. It's like a class 4 road. So we're talking like roots and stuff, like just crazy, like no reason to be driving in this place. But I was hands on the wheel, which is part of my story, independence and, really just pushing forward, And what happens is the car gets stuck and I get out of the car and I see a man in the forest and he has a small deer and he's cutting the horns off it, which of course is just a horrifying thing to encounter. And so why would the dream bring something like this? Why would a character show up doing such a horrible and graphic thing? Well, clearly they're wanting me to see something. They're wanting me to understand something. And they're actually trying to evoke a feeling, which is the pain and grief of something having been taken. Something special too, because most of the time female deer don't have horns, but like the idea of the horns being taken. Now, when I worked that dream with my own therapist, originally it was more about like she was wondering, well, is this about like needing to lose your defendedness? Well, it's a pretty harsh way to bring it, right? But I had a follow-up dream a few nights later that allowed us to understand that this was really about a loss. The loss of something special, something the part of me that I had to sever basically in order to survive my own traumas, and which had to do with childhood abuse and sexual abuse. And so the idea of the horns coming back was carried in a dream a few nights later, where a woman was walking on my land. And I had, at the time where I lived, I had about 78 acres of forest and field and beautiful piece of land. And she was walking around on my land and she found a deer antler and she came to my door and she held it out to me, offered it to me, and it had carved symbols on it. It was very magical. And so receiving it back was like a recognition and an acknowledgement of the loss and the possibility for healing. And I did 2 different paintings back then, and this was a number of years ago now, that I tended to do these very literal snapshot of images. Let me see, I'm just going to pick these 2 paintings because these 2 show it. So here's the first one, the man in the forest who's taken the antlers. And the fawn, which is really the small child, which is the child, and her pain, her tears, the blood coming down. And then the return is embodied in this image, which I painted after the follow-up dream of being offered the antler with the carved symbols on it. And I, of course, added the deer, which is, we've got the mother and father here. And the idea of the child held in the womb of the great mother is part of what, so I was inspired, obviously, when I was making this painting to move beyond the wounding and into the possibility of healing and really being reborn, which is what we're talking about. It's like when something ends, something new can come alive. So all the work I had done to that point leading up to these dreams were what kind of allowed me to begin to see this possibility for something beyond just the pain. because we don't want to get stuck there. We don't want to be stuck in pain and suffering. You know, yes, bad things happened, and yes, we can be healed. We can experience the gift of having something sacred returned to us. So these moments in the dreams, just to use these words, are sacred encounters. Even the man cutting off the horns could be considered that, as difficult as that moment is. Now, you know, to answer that person's question, yes, we certainly, our goal is not to re-traumatize people. That's not what we want to be doing. And so if we're seeing indications of real challenge in the material, we do need to, if we don't have that skill set ourselves, we need to recognize when to make referrals.
Now, may I ask a couple of questions about the dream? Because I'm just curious, because you had the image of the man cutting off the dream, of the antlers, and then a woman kind of bringing it back. And I wondered if, you know, well, there's something you could talk about, because even the earlier dream that you shared with, you said the divine feminine was applying the ointment on the back. And I mean, mainly in terms of the collective, because one of the things with the expressive body is we're looking at the divine, working with the divine feminine as a possible antidote to the work, or to even to the world that we're living in, you know. And I just wondered if there was
that's a good point. Interesting how that is. It is a sort of natural progression of the dreams. I do see, at least, you know, it might be different. I've had a few male clients over the years, but I have to say most of my clients have been women. And so often we're working with those particular manifestation of issues that relate to women, you know, our stuff, and the long chain, which we're all a part of. I think that what I have seen is that a lot of the wounding, it doesn't, like, for myself, a lot of my trauma came because I had an abusive mother who was very, very abusive physically and emotionally, which resulted later in my being in situations which then resulted in further traumatization sexually with men. So a lot of issues with men for me that I've had to work through. But the healing figure, the primary healing figure has been the feminine for me. And I've seen that in many, many of my clients as well, that she comes often, the feminine comes in as a healer, and in her capacity as the nurturer, the nurturing, healing figure. Whereas the masculine tends to come, excuse me, more as the agent provocateur, you know, doing something very provocative, like the man who's cutting off the horns, or in his healing capacity as the lover, maybe, or as the father, you know, the archetypal father, offering our sense of being, excuse me, I had some water here somewhere, our sense of needing to feel safe and protected. And so being the small child, being in the adequacy of the father is how I think of it. Feeling our inadequacy, not in a negative sense, but feeling our smallness to the divine. Now we can feel that with the goddess too. And I'll use different words for these energies, the gods, the angels, whatever we want to call them. The goddesses will come too and offer that same sort of sense of how I'm part of something much bigger than I could possibly know. And these figures will come in a healing way, but I do believe that a lot of the healing does come through the feminine. At least that's what I've seen. It to open us and prepare us maybe for more healing through the masculine.
And would that be, because I know, of course, in the personal, it really is the personal story, but I'm wondering in terms of, not in terms of man and woman, but in terms of masculine and feminine, which, considering that we live in a time where the feminine has been repressed, quality of the feminine, not, I mean, of course, women, but would that be a reason to kind of bring the balance back? Would that be one of the reasons why the healing comes through would it be like the being, the coming into being, coming into that sense, or not necessarily? Again, do you think it's just very personal?
Well, I do think it's very personal, and I hate to make too many generalizations because it can be very easy to place a story on top of dreams, which are so deeply intimate and personal. But for many of us, yes, the idea of coming back into balance with the yin and the yang is a huge part of the story. Most of us are out of balance. And so, and it doesn't matter what gender you are, how you're out of balance. You could be a guy and be out of balance with the masculine or the feminine, or a woman and be overly masculinized or over identified with the feminine. So it really, the whole gender thing is like almost like a red herring, but it has to do with balance within ourselves. I sometimes think of one of my teachers back in the day, Bregman, used to always say, the boy is I am that I am, meaning the masculine energy is this sort of like that Aryan sort of bursting forth type energy. I am that I am. And that the girl was, I am that I am with you. And so that she's very relational, and the two together is like this unstoppable force of like what it means to be very rooted in our own sense of self and our intuition and our wisdom, and able to be in relationship from that place. And so for women, a lot of times it is about finding the I am that I am agency, like feeling that sense of ourself, who we are, which allows us to open to like that intuition. I am that I am with you. Like how do we know where we are and who we are and what is right for us in any given moment? Many folks struggle with that because one thing that trauma does is it really messes with our understanding of who we are on that deep level, which is to say it mucks with our intuition, and we can no longer trust ourselves. Like, is this good for me or is this not good for me? And this is why you see we get into relationships that aren't healthy for us, or we take actions that go against our own interest because our intuition has gotten kind of out of balance. So I think in a larger sense, the energies are working to come towards wholeness, or a sense of balance. And how that's achieved is going to be different, and what it looks like in the dreams is going to be different for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to move on to the questions that actually came to us. Actually, before that, I have one of my own questions. So I find in my work that the dreaming body and the moving body, because I practice authentic movement, are very, very kind of similar. Or, when I'm moving, I will have the character would appear from a dream. And I want to know a little bit about your thoughts about that, and also to ask you, because you do so much art with your dreams, so there's the dream and you work with it with your dream worker or your therapist, and then when you engage with it with the arts, something new is revealed, which might even change the dream a little bit. Is that right? So because in authentic movement, we speak in the present all the time in order to allow, like you said earlier, movement. So you can have a dream, you can have a experience, and then you move it and you feel into a different experience, or your perception of that experience itself has shifted a little bit. Something has moved within you, and so I just wanted to know, and I know you've answered it a little bit, but I think it's Mindel who says that the dreaming body and the moving body are the same, and would that be right? And is that something you find with artwork as well, visual art?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the practice, what your teachings are around expressive movements per se, but expressive movement therapy. But the thing about the dream is it's outside of space and time, and the body moving. Like, I often work, and you know this because we work together, with the somatic experience, the movement in the dream body that is in motion can be linked to our outer world expression at any given time. by simply using primary imagination to create that link and actually, moving. So like if somebody does a particular movement practice, I often will link up the dream, and folks who are very connected to the body will have actual physical manifestations. Like if they get shot with an arrow in a dream, they will actually, their dream body will experience the piercing of the arrow, and they may have outside of that experience in the physical realm an experience of pain in their side even. And it will be a reminder that, oh, I'm doing this really deep work of having been pierced by the arrow. And it doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I've got cancer in my kidney. It's really, it's the work that we're doing, but I'm probably not even on the right topic with what you're trying to get at.
It is. I think, no, it's absolutely. I think what you said, I think you clarified, made it very clear when you said you follow the movement of the dream. And I think that is what we do in authentic movement. We move we allow ourselves to be moved.
Right. And it's very in the moment too.
Yeah.
So it's like wherever it takes us is where we go.
Yeah.
And we don't always know where that's going to be.
Yeah.
So you can't just read a dream and say it's about this, this, and this.
Right.
You have to, when you're working with that material, you are moving. You're in movement in the session.
Yeah.
The dreamer's in movement when they have the dream, but then you're in movement when you're in the session, and we don't always know where that will take us. But we follow that, and the practitioner is providing the safety of that container to allow that movement to happen.
Yes. And it's the same thing when you're painting as well. You are continuing to move.
Hopefully.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes we can get stuck in our head.
Right.
This
sure.
sucks. This painting's horrible.
Yeah.
We can go into a place of shutdown, and that's true. And it'll happen sometimes in sessions where people are just not wanting to go with whatever the movement is. But yes, the idea, I think, is to enliven the dream further by working with it in a contemplative way. Yeah. Now, by contemplative, as it relates to the arts, it might be writing, it might be painting, it might be music.
Yes.
There's a lot of different ways that you can move with that material.
So just one more question related to this is, so a lot of people, most of us, if you're not engaged with dream work, we just wake up and we remember a dream and we don't do anything about it, right? But just having had a dream in itself, my experience is that itself is healing. Even if we don't engage with it, it is a process of the psyche kind of coming into balance. Is that right? Or?
Well, I think that certainly, some folks would say, well, dreaming is just the residue, it's the psyche trying to resolve itself. It's taking out the trash. I don't agree with that point of view. I think there's a lot more going on. And I think it is about wanting to always move us towards a deeper truth about ourselves. So it could be as mundane as like, I was shopping with my mom in the grocery store. Trust me, we could have a whole session on that, because there's something there. But I think it's true that the dream is always working us, whether we know it or not. And for folks who are actively placing attention on their dreams, they are going to see their dreams change. They're going to come to new sort of understandings. They are going to receive messages. And even in between sessions, I often tell folks, okay, between now and our next session, feel this, notice that. I might kind of have that basic framework that says, feel the grief that you felt in this moment. So return to that moment through primary imagination. And notice when you're using your navigation device to rise above the situation. I have a client who's said I could share about her work, who has a dream where what she does, and she calls it her navigation device, where she literally rises up away from whatever the thing is that is either scaring her and it feels good. It feels so good. And she wants that to be like the good thing. I'm like, well, it feels good and it has helped you survive. However, doesn't it also, can you also not feel this other piece about how it's the way that you jump away? So, and we have that agreement now, so she understands it's not that you don't do it, you can do it. You might need to, it's a dissociation that happens.
Yeah.
But I even when people forget to do the homework, the so-called homework in between sessions, and they'll come into the session, I always like to open the session. So how, what's come up since the last time we met? Did anything come up out of the homework? Oh, what was my homework? I forgot. Like, what was it? Like, oh gosh, I can't remember that dream. And I always say, don't worry, it's okay. Because that homework's been working in you, whether you knew it or not. And a lot of times I might open up my folder and say, well, we had the dream about, and oh yeah, that. And then they will have some thing that comes to them that was like, yeah, I really noticed XYZ. And so I always do a check-in, like how are things, like what's happening. Right. Sometimes it's a little bit of what's happening in your life. Sometimes it's like, how did the work go? And then we go into the new dreams. And so again, to speak to movement, there's always this movement. It's kind of like a wave, like the old dreams are come in the past session and we're in the new session and so on. And we keep kind of moving through in that way. And the dreams, and I work with clusters of dreams. So just to say, like, one dream can hold the whole moment, right? Can hold both sides of that, like the deep feeling and it can also hold the thing that's blocking us. It can hold both. But oftentimes I have a very flat horizontal dream with no possibility, no sort of like way out, if you will, no, really hard. And so, but there's another dream over here that may speak to what the opening is, the possibility of opening. So you can have like shutting down dreams, very like pressing down, difficult. But if you're working with the clusters, it becomes one big dream for me when I'm working with it, and they're informing one another. The psyche has a way of giving us all the material we need for a session every single time.
I know, yeah, absolutely.
No matter what.
Yeah, I remember sometimes also we don't have time to go through all the dreams, and then months later I suddenly pick up a dream that we've not worked on, and it feels really appropriate. Many months later, and we just, so that I find interesting. I'm going to go to people's questions.
Sure.
Anya asks, during COVID, a lot of people are noticing that they're experiencing quite interesting dreams. What's your take on that? And the other question was that she wakes up feeling parched and reeling from my dream, and it can be overwhelming to reflect and note down. Do you have any thought, any helpful tips around that?
Sure. So with regards to the COVID, so yeah, a lot of COVID's coming up a lot. I think what happens is the psyche, so in terms of the dream realm, the archetypal realm, if you will, it doesn't care about COVID. COVID is an event that's happening, that's ephemeral, that is not going to, it's a real thing that's happening to all of us. We're experiencing it. And the dream realm, it's not like the dreams have a point of view on what we should be doing about COVID. It's more that the psyche will take the issue of COVID, what's happening, and will incorporate and use that to continue to help us in our work. Because our work is timeless. It's outside of time. It doesn't follow, the rules of the outer world. And so the whole idea of COVID, as difficult as it is I do think that our psyche will take it. Like, so a lot of times for folks who have difficulties with intimacy, there'll be a lot of issues around, like, well, in the dream, they'll be like, so-and-so didn't have their mask on, like there's a distancing that can happen through that. Or like, there's a moment of affection, and then the thought comes in like, wait, what about COVID? I'm going to get infected, this kind of thing. And so oftentimes that dynamic is about other things too. So you've got that one layer, and then again, you've got the layer of COVID. Yes, it's a real thing. We have to take safety precautions. And yes, the mask matters, and yes, you don't want to put yourself at risk. But when we go down to the next layer, there's something else about what happens in the moment of intimacy when you pull away, or, you know, what is it like to feel, to see the person in the dream and they have a mask on and you can't see their face. Like, what is that experience like? And how is that familiar in your life to not feel like you can understand maybe what a person is feeling? All kinds of things. The dream uses everything, you know, to try to help us, actually. So that and there's more that could be said about that. But to answer the other question, when we wake from a dream feeling really sort of reeling from that material or flooded in some way, you know, it's different for everybody. I mean, because this particular person is saying they wake up parched, I would say drink 2 glasses of water. You know, that's going to help ground you. So if you're waking up parched and reeling, then it's about grounding a little bit, maybe. And so coming back into your body, like taking the water in. Sometimes thirst, I always think of thirst. When thirst comes in the dreams, that deeper layer can often be the truth that we're thirsty. We're thirsty for love. We're thirsty for healing. We're thirsty for spiritual connection, or for connection in general. It's a thirst, but it's a thirst for that which will nourish us in some way.
Another person was asking about falling in dreams. What, you know, the experience of falling. Do you have any thoughts of what that is? Is it different for different people, or is there, you know, a kind of like?
Well, of course, it depends upon the dream. If I had a dreamer in front of me who's bringing me a dream, it really depends on what's happening in the predicate of the dream and what's happening in the dream, what the actions are that the dreamer takes, and what they're feeling. But, you know, sometimes falling, you know, we have that moment of like when we're falling asleep where we dream that we're falling and we wake up with a start. That happens to me a lot. But when it comes in the dream and it's like you fell off a cliff or you witnessed somebody else fall off a cliff, let's just talk about that one. Sometimes falling is a good thing. We need to fall off the cliff that we're on to get to someplace else, because we're clinging to the side of the cliff. We need to fall. And so the falling can be actually a really good thing, even though the feeling that falling most often brings up is fear, you know, a really, really deep fear. Now, I think of fear as a really important feeling in dream work, because I think of fear when we think of archetypal fear versus trauma fear, or the fear of losing something I have or not getting something I want. Self-centered fear, maybe we could say. Different types of fear, but an archetypal fear, which can be invoked or evoked through a falling dream, is or facing the lion, like you're running and you turn around and face the thing, or something's going to happen. I had a dream one time where I was brought to in a ritual way to a ceremony, and I was standing over a fire with this is the feminine again, and she took out a knife and she pushed it into my heart. In the moments before she did this in the dream, I felt this knowing of what she was going to do and this incredible fear, but somehow I stayed. And so for me, when I worked with that material, it really was about a heart opening. It wasn't about trauma. Now, I have had other dreams where a man took a sword and went up through the vagina. And that, I would say, is probably not, you know, not a dream that is an opening, but more a representation of the violation or trauma. But I really took that dream in as an opening. And where did I got distracted by the question I saw come up, and then I forgot what I was talking about.
No, we were talking about how falling could be archetypal falling, the fear of falling.
Archetypal fear. Yeah. So I wanted to make one other point about this fear and what I call archetypal fear, is I really want to define that as the demarcation between the known and the unknown. And so when we hit that falling off point, when we hit that place, we really now are crossing the event horizon of what we know, which is maybe standing on the cliff, to what we don't know, which is the place of falling. We don't know where we're going to fall to. And I saw a question flash up about falling into one's body, and maybe you could tell me what it says, because I didn't quite.
So she says, "Hi Laura, I recently dreamed that I jumped out of a balcony, a premeditated action, thinking the fall is not of a great height. But when I jumped, the height is so elevated that the fear while falling was so visceral and real that it shook my emotional stability." And I was wondering what this could mean.
Yeah, well, certainly it means if one is taking a premeditated action to jump, then one is making a choice to jump into something. And, there is the idea, like there's many ways we could go with that. I think one question I might have for the dreamer is that familiar to you? Like you jump off the balcony thinking it's just going to be a little drop and it turns out to be this big fall. Does that ever happen to you? And what does that look like? What is the experience of that visceral fear? Like of realizing that you're now in the free fall and you don't know what's going to happen. These are questions I might ask. Like, what does that feel like? Have you ever felt that before? Oftentimes that kind of fear is like not something we always feel in our lives, but you never know. Somebody could say, yes, I was in this situation and this is the fear I felt. A trauma, it could be related to trauma, and to have your emotional foundation shaken. Well, I would definitely be asking questions about exactly what that means, because I don't know. What does that mean to have the emotional foundation shaken? Yeah, that's a pretty intense moment. I'd want to have some other dreams, the cluster, because that's going to help me understand more maybe about what that might be.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of, just to give an idea, like kind of like how I might be thinking about asking questions and wanting to be with the dreamer to understand like what is it for them.
Yeah, sure.
I can't really interpret it through the idea of, oh, it's a falling dream. And because
but
I
think what you said is quite, it's already offers a lot, right? This thing of, I think that it's not such a big deal, but it ends up being a big deal. Is that familiar? The feeling of fear. So someone else asked about traveling dreams with families, including deceased family members. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, traveling, again, it's particular to the dreamer. I would be asking a lot of questions about who's the family. And who's the deceased family member, and what were they to you? Were they like a loving person that you lost, or were they a difficult part of your family history? I would be wanting to know a little bit about that, because all those kinds of questions about family of origin are going to reveal whatever the message is for the dreamer. And what is the feeling? Like, what do you feel as you're traveling with family? Obviously, that's a question to ask. Like, where are you in the traveling? Is it a car? Like, where are you seated? Like, I would be wanting to get sort of like an understanding of what is the dreamer's position within the unit that they're traveling with, the family unit that they're traveling with, and how is that different or the same? Like, how does that reflect in how they felt maybe growing up in their family? So a lot of questions about that. I mean, traveling in general can be about the journey. Like, so we are all on a journey, and we are sometimes all bringing a bunch of stuff from our family with us. And sometimes we need that. And so sometimes it's about like reclaiming that, but sometimes it's about recognizing that we have all this stuff attached to us that is not ours. And where are we in the journey? So again, it's without sitting with somebody and really unpacking that, I wouldn't begin to know. But those are some of the questions I might be asking.
Yeah. And someone else asked about childhood dreams and images that still stay with us, and how do we engage with that?
So childhood dreams, like often, just to speak quickly about the child, when the child comes in the dream, you've got the girl, the boy, we might think of the child. When the child is like 5, 6 years old and younger, we're really talking about the man, we're getting a view of the oftentimes, not always, because for some people trauma goes all the way back, but oftentimes we're seeing the innocence, the soulful, innocent child, the vulnerable child, and the innocent child. And so it depends upon what those childhood memories are. Now, if they're childhood memories that are dreams of being a child, I'd say we're accessing some aspect of that soulfulness of the child, maybe, depending upon the age and depending upon the history. There's many ways to engage with it, but it really depends upon what's happening in the dream and what was happening for the dream. And one question I always ask when the dreams come where you're remembering stuff from your childhood: how old were you? What was happening at that time? If a child comes in the dream and the child is a certain age, it's not you, it's another child that you see. I always ask that question because oftentimes it's the dream's way of saying, hey, something happened at 6 years old. And that something could be something really hard, or it could be wonderful memory of something we've forgotten. It's like, oh yeah, there's this part of me.
Yeah. Okay. I know we're really running out of time and there are so many questions now. I'm not going to go into, I know there are a lot of personal dreams, and I know, like it is really about the person, but there's one that says about, she's going down the spiral staircase and she encounters herself and she's surprised, but the other self wasn't so surprised. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, what's it like to encounter the self, to encounter oneself in that way? One technique that I do work with in dreams sometimes is to switch people out. And a dream like that, maybe I might be like, well, okay, so you're here and you're surprised. What would it be like to be her, to see the surprised you? Like I don't know, like what is that, and how, when we encounter the self, it's likely, when you think about self and you think about it in those more clinical terms, is it like is it the ego that we're encountering, or is it some other part of ourself? Like there are these separate aspects of ourselves to be curious about that. But the spiral staircase, of course, is, when we're going down, it means we're going down, right? We're going into the unconscious, we're going into the depths, we're in a vertical descent. So we have to believe that whatever is there is something vertical in nature versus horizontal.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to kind of maybe stop with the questions because we literally have 5 minutes more before we end our session. I think the questions now would be, because you did speak about trauma and you spoke about, what is the connection between dreams and the body? And also in terms of how important then are embodied practices as compared to psychological practices when you're doing dream work, I guess. Which would you?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's hard to psychological practices. I think how important are dreams to the body? I think very important, because I think the work is about coming back into the body, but it's into the feeling body, because this is where our intuition lives. This is where we know who we are, is through that felt experience. Many people would argue, well, we know through the mind, but I would say that the dreams are usually often trying to go against the mind, because the mind is the place of stories, and the mind is the place that creates a narrative that can be a very harsh narrative about who we are. And many times the mind is telling us the story over and over again. We don't even hear it. And so if we do hear it, if it comes in the dream, oftentimes it'll come because a character will be reflecting those thoughts to us, and we hear it and we're like, yeah, I do. That is something a story I tell myself. Well, we can know that we've probably told ourselves that story 1,000,000 times before we ever heard it the first time. And it's very violent. It will often come to us in this way of real violence, where against us. that it's so that we can really understand how harsh that is. So I guess I'm deviating a little bit, but I think it's very, very important. And most of the work that I do with folks is about feeling. And so being in whatever that moment is. And if I might, since I know we're short on time, I had written this poem, and I'll just read it if that's okay.
Sure,
because
absolutely.
I think it really, this is a dream inspired poem. It's literally about the dream I had. And it's very much about what it's like to be in the body. And it's called Rolling. I never became afraid of the dirt. The loamy darkness of earth still finds its ways into the creases, even when decorum and wily age say no. Rolling, rolling down through ferns and green, slippery leaves, bare skin picking up twigs and twines and flecks like a large human lint roller. Blonde locks lose their thin, blown, dried safety. Wild earth girl tangles emerge, a place for birds to nest. Come and get me, I cry into the salty breeze. Rolling, rolling down through dunes to crashing waves, laughter lifted to the cries of gulls and least terns that swoop their greeting. And you, my beloved, come rolling too.
Lovely.
And if you can be with the dreamer in that moment and feel what it's like to just the freedom of rolling. And it's, it's not about anything other than the incredible joy of being in that moment. And and you really feel it through the body. It's not about a story of rolling. It's not about what rolling means. It's not even about the beloved, although it is, because there's that relational piece of like, we're not alone in the expression of joy. And that expression of joy can come through in a very visceral way in the body, and what it feels like to feel that freedom for me, and laughter and love. And I think we're all looking for that. We're all wanting that kind of freedom and joy and love. And I think the dreams want that for us too. And so they give us those moments so that we can remember and know the possibility of that for us. And we begin to manifest it more in our outer lives when we can know what it is through the feeling of it in the dream. And that's why I feel like the body does matter a lot. Yeah, it really does.
It's really, it's when you embody it, you know that it's possible because you've experienced it, right?
Yeah, you've experienced it. And you're just like, that's what it feels like. It's like learning how to snowboard or something. You don't know how to do it until you feel it. And then when you feel it, you're like, this is what it feels like. And we need those moments because that's what helps us understand. Oh, this is what I'm feeling. And this is where I'm at.
And also to know how important, like how wonderful it felt, and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to have that in my life. I mean, at least for me, I think it's really those moments of, okay, I've experienced this in my dream and I want it, and there's a possibility of that, then I'm going to go for it.
Where we can be open to it, at least welcome it, instead of going, oh, well, I got to go clean the toilet. I got to do the dishes. I've got to take care of this. I've got to do that. All these responsibilities, or whatever it is, the thing that you do. We all have something that we do that takes us from this joy. And the dreams are going to help us see the tension between those places, the joy and what we do that separates us from it. And that gives us the ability to make choices for ourselves.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laura. I mean, I know we're gone out of time, and I was, there were just so many questions, and it's so, I mean, it's the talk. I mean, I don't think it can ever, we can't do justice in 1.5 hours or 1.5 years.
True.
So we do the
well,
best.
If folks are interested in exploring more, I do have a website. I am available for sessions. My website is www.archetypaldreamworks.com. You can, my email address is available through there. So if folks do have questions, I'm happy to try to answer a few more via email. If somebody's got some burning desire they really felt like they didn't get an answer to, that they think would be beneficial to them to at least be able to explore, feel free to write to me. And you know, you could have an opportunity to learn more about this too through Brinda's program. She's asked me to teach a module in the advanced training, and I'm really excited to be doing that. And I love seeing practitioners bringing dream work as a healing modality to support what they're doing, because I think there's a lot that can be learned, and a lot of help can come from just asking a client when you're working with them, what did you have any dreams since the last time we talked? Maybe you're not a dream worker, but there might be some really informative stuff in there that's going to inform what's happening in the expressive movement therapy or the expressive arts. Yeah. So exciting and really, really fun conversation. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Laura. We could have gone on forever, but we have to stop. Thank you. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming and listening. And yeah, please do write into us, and we can even, and if you haven't got Laura's website, you can write into us and we can send you the website and the email address. And we'll be back, I think, next month with another open house to talk more about what the expressive body is going to be like. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week, rest of the week. And yeah, and I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.